Hey, have you heard about this? The UK government has just announced plans to ban social media for under 16s. And over in Australia, social media restrictions for under 16s have already started rolling out after laws passed in late 2025. When I first heard about it, I honestly thought, wait, what? Are governments actually trying to stop teenagers from using social media now? It sounded kind of extreme. I assumed this was probably just another controversial political decision, but then I started looking into it. And that's when I found something I wasn't expecting. This isn't just happening in the UK or Australia. Countries all over the world are suddenly talking about the same thing. France, Norway, Spain, Greece, Malaysia, and quite a few others. Some are bringing in restrictions. Some are discussing age limits. Others are looking at age verification systems. Now, whether you agree with these laws or completely hate them, the thing I found really strange was this. These countries don't agree on much. Different cultures, different politics, different education systems. Yet they're all suddenly worried about the same thing. And that got me thinking, what changed? What did governments suddenly start seeing that made them think social media needed rules that television, video games, and even the internet never had? And maybe the bigger question, even if governments have good intentions, will any of this actually work? Because the deeper I looked into this, the more complicated it got. For years, concerns about social media were treated like the usual, adults blaming new technology. And honestly, that's happened with pretty much every generation. People once thought television would ruin society. Video games would destroy people's brains. The internet itself was supposed to be dangerous. So when people started blaming social media for all sorts of problems, a lot of people rolled their eyes. But then researchers started noticing something. Across different countries, more and more reports were showing the same trend. Anxiety seemed to be going up. Depression seemed to be going up. Mental health problems among young people were becoming more common. And what got people's attention wasn't just the numbers, it was the timing. Because some of these trends seemed to appear around the same time smartphones and social media became a huge part of everyday life. One of the researchers who brought a lot of attention to this was psychologist Twenge. She looked at large sets of data in the United States and found that depression, self-harm, and suicide-related outcomes among teenagers increased significantly after around 2010 to 2012. Now that's important because that's roughly when smartphones and social media became deeply embedded in teenage life. But here's the important bit. That doesn't prove social media caused those problems. And most researchers would agree with that. This is still heavily debated, but it was enough to make people start asking questions. Then similar concerns started appearing elsewhere. In England, NHS data showed that the proportion of children with a probable mental health condition rose from around 1 in 9 in 2017 to around 1 in 5 by 2023. Researchers working with the World Health Organization also reported increasing levels of problematic social media use among teenagers across Europe. And that's when this stopped being just a conversation between parents. Researchers were talking about it, doctors were talking about it, public health organizations were talking about it. And eventually, governments started paying attention too. Not because they were certain social media was causing all these problems, but because they weren't sure it wasn't. But here's the part I think a lot of people miss. Governments aren't worried just because kids spend a lot of time online. If that was the case, we'd probably have seen these kinds of laws years ago. What they're worried about is how social media actually works. Because social media isn't really just a website anymore. It's more like a system that's constantly competing for your attention. Think about it. Every notification, every recommendation, every autoplay video, every infinite scroll, every algorithm. They're all trying to keep you engaged for just a little bit longer. And a lot of experts think younger people might be more vulnerable to that because their brains are still developing. Things like impulse control, emotional regulation, decision-making. Those skills are still being built. Researchers often point to things like Cyberbullying, constant comparison, fear of missing out, poor sleep, validation through likes and followers. And honestly, you probably don't need a study to recognize some of that. Most of us have experienced it. You pick up your phone for 5 minutes, then somehow 40 minutes disappear. Or you find yourself checking the same app again even though nothing new has happened. That doesn't automatically mean social media is harmful, but it does help explain why governments started looking at it differently from television or video games. Because unlike those older technologies, social media learns from you. And for some policymakers, that's what makes it different. And this is where things get really interesting. Because even if governments are right about the problem, that doesn't automatically mean they've found the right solution. Let's go back to Australia for a second. Because Australia is one of the first countries actually trying this, which means we finally have something we've never really had before, a real-world test. And some of the early results have surprised people. Polling published in 2026 found that many children were still able to access restricted platforms. Around 70% of those who were still using restricted services said it was easy to get around the restrictions. More than half said the ban had made no difference to their online safety. And some even said they felt less safe online. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, this doesn't prove the policy has failed. It's still very early. But it does raise a pretty obvious question. If kids can easily get around the rules, how effective are the rules actually going to be? And that's where a lot of the criticism starts. One of the biggest concerns is privacy. Because if social media companies are supposed to stop under 16s creating accounts, they first need to know who's under 16. And that usually means some kind of age verification. For some people, that's not a problem. For others, it's a huge problem, because they worry it could lead to more identity checks, more personal information being shared online, or even broader digital ID systems in the future. Whether those fears are justified or not, it's become one of the biggest arguments against these laws. Then there's another criticism. Maybe governments are focusing on the wrong thing. Some people argue the real problem isn't children. The real problem is the platforms, the algorithms, the recommendation systems, the features designed to keep people scrolling for as long as possible. Their argument is basically, if social media is causing harm, shouldn't we fix the thing causing the harm, instead of restricting the people using it? And then there's YouTube. This one comes up a lot, because unlike many social media platforms, YouTube isn't just entertainment. Millions of students use it for revision. Science, maths, languages, history, programming. Some students probably learn more from YouTube than they do from certain lessons at school. So people worry that broad restrictions could accidentally affect access to genuinely useful educational content. And finally, there's the parenting argument. Some people believe this shouldn't be the government's job at all. They think parents should decide how much internet access their children have. So even among people who agree there's a problem, there's still a huge disagreement about what the solution should be. And honestly, this is probably the most important part of the whole story. Nobody really knows what happens next. The science isn't settled, the policies are new, and technology keeps changing faster than anyone can keep up with. Maybe these restrictions will help. Maybe they'll have very little effect. Maybe they'll create entirely new problems nobody has thought about yet. And here's the thing. People have been wrong before. Some fears about television turned out to be exaggerated. Some fears about video games turned out to be exaggerated. So it's possible we're seeing another version of that. But it's also possible we're not. Because social media is something humanity has never really dealt with before. Never before have billions of children grown up with smartphones, personalized algorithms, and social media from such a young age. We're in completely new territory. And in a strange way, everyone is experimenting. Governments are experimenting. Social media companies are experimenting. Parents are experimenting. And the rest of us are figuring it out as we go. Whether these bans succeed or fail, this debate isn't going away. Looking at the concerns around young people's mental health, attention, and well-being, It's understandable why governments around the world have started paying attention. What most people seem to agree on is that there's a problem. The real argument is about what we should do about it. Should governments restrict access? Should parents take more responsibility? Or should social media companies be forced to change how their platforms work? Because countries around the world seem to agree that something needs to change. What they don't agree on is what that change should be. So what do you think? Are governments heading in the right direction? Or are they trying to solve a real problem with the wrong solution?